I moved away because I'd had enough of my parents favoring my sister. I recently started taking care of my parents on my own as an 18-year-old. My sister is roughly 10 years my junior. Her pregnancy was unplanned, and she almost didn't go to term. I was never told much about how difficult my mother's second pregnancy was, so I don't know many specifics. But I do know that it was so difficult on her body that once my sister was born, my mother was unable to conceive. That year, she spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital. Not only did my mother almost not make it through the birth, the fact that my younger sister might not have been born caused her and my father to get attached to her. I felt like the other kid in the house ever since, save for the times when they needed a free babysitter. For reasons I'll explain later, the degree of long-term favoritism my parents displayed makes me think they were actually mentally ill for failing to recognize the damage it was doing to me. Commencing with my 11th birthday, my sister was 2 years old and would cry at the sight of a birthday cake that wasn't hers, so her parents asked me to let her blow out my candles. My parents had me do it even though I didn't want to. They rekindled the candles so I could try again. But the moment felt utterly wrecked coming after her. The following year, the year after that, and so on and so forth, saw the same thing occur. All they did was push it till it was standard procedure. On my birthdays, my sister had to receive gifts as well. I never felt the same way for her. When I questioned why, they just replied that since I'm a boy, boys shouldn't worry about it as much. I get that I was a child, but did they truly believe what I said was wise? Not really. Additionally, on my birthday, my parents would always select a location that my sister would like before mine. It eventually got to the point where I had no birthdays while my sister had two. Beyond this, my sister became the center of my parents' entire existence. My sister had to be willing to do anything I wanted her to do. It was vetoed if not, unless I could handle it by myself. I discovered that my video games didn't seem to bother me while I was in my room playing them, unless my sister decided to rush in and irritate me. That's the reason I locked the door. I freaked out because I was an angry teenager who was tired of having my privacy invaded at any time, even if my parents asked me to take it down. I was naked in my own room, and when I pointed out how ridiculous it was, my parents got unhappy with me. This happened multiple times when my sister came running in. They changed their minds and simply allowed me to keep the lock. Because of her constant being taken advantage of and her demanding nature, my sister acquired a princess complex. Therefore, I avoided her as much as possible. Whatever rationalization I could muster to avoid dealing with her, even if it meant inventing stories to buy myself some alone time. I had more alone time because my parents had a teenage girl watch me. The babysitter then left since my sister was uncooperative, and by claiming she performed a poor job, my parents attempted to avoid having to pay. The girl enticed other people to join her. At last, my parents gave her the money they owed her. Then they employed a second girl, who stayed to watch the kids on a regular basis. I tried my best to keep myself occupied at my part-time work, but my parents insisted that I was to watch my sister whenever I had free time. My sister gave me directions and regarded me as her personal butler. She even gave me a ridiculous nickname that she wouldn't quit. The mere mention of that moniker made my wrath boil, and if I failed to satisfy her every need, she would weep, contact our parents, and I would have to face consequences for mistreating her. This led to many intense disputes between my parents and me, and eventually, after I stopped compromising, we hardly spoke to one another at all. Nevertheless, they had the audacity to boast to other parents that I worked so hard because of them when I graduated from high school. They weren't incorrect, though, in that the reason they were considering wasn't the real one. My parents pretended to have accomplished a lot, even though I worked hard to battle for my time when I would be free. Perhaps they did prior to the birth of my sister, but following, everything revolved around her. It wasn't until parent-teacher conferences that they asked me about school. My parents simply took me to a place where my sister would always have more fun than me after I graduated with an A, B, and C average. Though the purpose of the vacation was to celebrate my 18th birthday in July, the truth was that things really came to light. It didn't feel at all like it was about me, even though it was my 18th. For once, I really hope we were heading to my favorite restaurant. However, they held the celebration at the closest imitation Chuck E. Cheese in the area, which is the only one like it in our area. Thus, it became the unofficial site of celebration for any significant accomplishment, such as my high school graduation. Yes, I did mention that my sister would love this place more than I would. with nothing to do but eat subpar pizza and play claw machines and obsolete arcade games for tickets to poorly produced prizes. I was encircled by youngsters half my age who were throwing parties. That did not cheer me up. When cake time finally arrived, my parents brought out a pink cake decorated with white flowers. It was clearly not a boy's cake, even though it bore my name. There were just 10 candles. My sister was directly in front of my parents when they lighted the candles and let them go out. That is when it ultimately transpired. I suddenly experienced all of my pent-up hatred flashing before my eyes. I then just started crying uncontrollably. I was crying in front of the entire family as an 18-year-old boy. Time appeared to stop for everyone since they were all so shocked. When I stood up, everything that I'd been suppressing for the previous 8 years suddenly poured out of me like word vomit. This was something the whole family got to see, and when it was eventually finished, I just went outside and sat by the family car. Following me were a few relatives who apologized and said they were unaware of the pink cake since my parents had kept it covered until it was served. I remarked that it made no difference that they were unaware. They all just stood by and let Little Miss Sunshine rule my life. I haven't really celebrated my birthday or had a true birthday for the last 8 years. Everything revolved around her. Then, on the most significant birthday of my life, they all expected me to do nothing more than nod and smile as usual, all the while passing my sister a cake that was clearly intended for her, even though it wasn't her birthday. A few of them began apologizing to me, but their justification was that they had assumed I was all right with it because my parents had stated so. My parents made me do it every year, even though I told them I was never okay with it, and eventually I simply pretended to embrace it. I threw out my arms and motioned for you to look where we were. Is this the location where I wanted to celebrate turning 18 and my graduation? After all these time, no one has even attempted to defend myself. My sister has it all, and I'm simply the other kid. My parents stopped allowing me invite them long ago after they tried to voice their objections about my sister getting to blow out my candles, so I never even got to have any of my friends there. Was it really so horrible of a desire for one of the 365 days of the year to be about me and not her? Instead, because I want my own birthday, I'm treated like the entitled, avaricious brat. I simply started bawling ugly again after that. By then, my mother was sobbing too, so my father had come outside to scold me for creating such a big deal out of nothing. My sister was angry that I had destroyed her moment and that everyone there now believed they were awful parents. In the end, I yelled at them, telling them he should know exactly why they are bad parents. The rest of the family surrounded him like a pack of wolves when I said that. I guess it's better late than never. But this is unlike anything I've ever seen. The majority of the mob followed my father inside to confront my mother when they had virtually backed up to the restaurant's front entrance. My grandparents came to stay with me and expressed regret for keeping their eyes closed for so long. I'm not sure what was said to my parents in the restaurant, but it took them about 30 minutes to leave, and when they did, they didn't look well. Neither of my parents could look me in the eyes, and my mother was still sniffling from the intense crying. The audience didn't really think that their awkward apologies for what they had done and their offer to have the party again somewhere else was sufficient. My parents, together with one of my uncles, made a loud declaration that they would never again force me to let my sister blow out my birthday candles, invite her around, or make it in any way about her. Another ahem occurred. In addition, my parents expressed their regret for sending me a cake that was clearly not intended for me, and said they thought I had stopped caring about cakes. In my age range, whoa, that was a bad thing to say. I lost my temper again and shouted at them that it didn't matter how old I was. My sister had been handed my birthday by them without any justification. They were aware of the reason why. Then I stated that it was too darn late to throw another party, so there was no point. They made it rather evident that they don't care about me. They destroyed 8 years of my life before I reached adulthood. What birthdays in the future could I possibly look forward to with them? My father, however, became enraged with me for stating it. However, he stopped talking when the whole family yelled at him. I'm exactly right, my grandfather informed him. The damage done can't be undone at this point. He claimed that ever since my sister was born, my parents have been terrible people who have favored me and made me feel like the outsider. Furthermore, because they simply allowed it to happen to them, they were all terrible people. And an apology is not nearly enough. My life was due to me again. My mother broke down once more and attempted to approach me while sobbing and apologizing, but I wouldn't allow her near me, and half of the family blocked her path. I simply responded that I had had enough and turned to leave. I got lost and was found by one of my aunts. Even though I could hear my parents being yelled at and cursed at by other family members for what had transpired, I was so angry that I wasn't even thrilled that my parents had finally received some justice. And during all of this, where was my sister? She remained alone in the restaurant, devouring cake and tearing into gifts that were intended for me. In case you were wondering, when I sobbed and left, my parents did indeed offer her some cake. You would imagine that wasn't their main priority at the time, but they were later called out for it. After calming me down, my grandparents made me sit in their ancient minivan as the others dispersed from the celebration. When my sister realized she was going to have to unwrap all of my presents, including a brand new smartphone that she was not permitted to keep, she flung it against the wall and destroyed it. She then had a major meltdown. Only a few months ago, on her own birthday, did she receive a brand new phone. After I became so angry that I was swearing I would never celebrate my birthday again, my grandparents allowed me to spend the night at their place. I still didn't talk to my folks when I got home. My father was exactly as silent as I was, and my mother would just not stop crying because I wouldn't talk to her. When my grandparents persuaded me to join them for supper the following weekend, I was shocked to see a brand new celebration waiting for me. My parents were present, and they managed to maintain the "don't hate us" expression on their faces for nearly the whole time. There was a large chocolate cake with 18 candles on top, and my name was even written on a banner. I didn't actually receive either this year, so they termed it my happy belated birthday graduation party. It was kind of like I had to fake happiness. 8 years of partiality cannot be reversed or even somewhat lessened by one excellent party. Really? Furthermore, where was my sister? It wasn't all about her anymore, so she curled her lip and folded her arms while seated at the table, and they sung a modified version of Happy Day instead of Happy Birthday for me. My sister then let out a loud, ear-bleeding young girl scream as soon as I blew out the candles. She had to be hurried out, and when my parents got back in, she appeared even more distraught. For the remainder of the gathering, she sulked silently in her chair. In addition, I received a new smartphone, and my sister was also given one back for her actions at the last celebration. However, it wasn't just the smartphone. My entire family contributed and bought me a car. I adored the simple white Volvo despite its age. As soon as I set eyes on it, my granddad fixed it himself and has a good understanding of automobiles. My sister let out another of those screams, so obviously she wasn't as delighted as I was. She began throwing a fit and demanding a car as well. They stayed inside the restroom for some time after my mother had to take her there. My father simply returned to his dejected expression. In a sense, my sister had undone their best effort to appear presentable to the entire family. My sister was acting that way because she was trained by her parents to be a spoilt princess, according to several family members who also had harsh words for my parents. It goes without saying that I immediately began to drive the automobile. But a few days later, my sister really destroyed it by using a hammer to smash 2 of the side windows and crack the windshield, rendering the vehicle immobile. Before she could do any more harm, my parents were able to stop her, but not before she screamed bloody murder at them when they grabbed her and took the hammer away, then attempted to bite them. Yes, my sister's actions had infuriated everyone, particularly my grandparents, who had invested a great deal of work on the automobile before my sister damaged it during a particularly intense rage. My sister was so spoiled by her grandparents that she was unable to understand that I could have something that she was not able to have. Additionally, my parents were criticized by other family members for raising my sister as an entitled brat who expects everything to be given to her, and for setting her up for failure by refusing to discipline her, even though her actions were not unpunished. As a result, my sister is likely to have a terrible adult life. My sister was sent to boarding school with effect from the start of the new academic year and was grounded for the remainder of the summer. Even though my mother sobbed uncontrollably, my father insisted that it was the best way to begin repairing the harm they had caused. Yes, they admit their mistakes wholeheartedly. They found it difficult to resist as nobody took any side. At that school, my sister is utterly miserable. She has been lying nearly non-stop, and she detests the rules and the outfits. These days, though, cameras are practically everywhere, so she's not getting away with much. She merely screamed at our parents for placing her in that situation when they attempted to visit her a few times. I've heard that she might attend this school till she is 18. My automobile was fixed by my folks. The windows and windshield were replaced by an auto glass firm, and the vehicle now has the same appearance as before. My grandfather approached me in August and said that if I was interested, he could find me a job working for a friend, but that I would have to move out of my parents' house if I didn't want to make the 40-mile trip. I was all for relocation. However, finding a first apartment wasn't that simple. To get admitted into a studio, I had to first get my credit card application approved. However, I made the adjustment, and I've been here since September. My parents are always contacting me, but when we do talk, I don't talk to them too often. I simply feel uncomfortable and awkward. According to what my grandfather has said, they just don't want to admit how poor of parents they were, and they think that by asking for my forgiveness, they would feel better about themselves. I will not, however, pardon, not in the near future. I'm at last content and free of them. They currently have nothing. Both my sister and I are absent from them. In addition, my parents had to put in more overtime because attending boarding school for my sister is expensive, and I can only imagine how much work they had to do for my birthday celebration. My car needed repairs, my house was abandoned, my relatives were furious, and now all they had left was their work. Although it doesn't make me happy and feels like extreme suffering, it is ultimately the outcome of their own acts. Edit. I want to express my gratitude to everyone for the honors I've received. It is really significant to me. I apologize for my lengthy message. I simply had to get everything out, and now that I have, I feel much better. A few people in the comments have referred to this piece as false in different ways. You are not at fault in my opinion. If I were in your position, I would read this with great skepticism and have similar questions, yet I experienced it. Some parents are just that way by nature. A few folks who had comparable, if not worse, circumstances with all the awful parents out there have also been in touch with me. Does what mine did truly seem that unbelievable? To be honest, it felt a bit excessive for the entire family to rush back into the restaurant to speak with my parents. However, I come from a close-knit family where we tend to stick together and do things in groups. At get-togethers, it's extremely easy for the group to turn against a single person. I witnessed a very inappropriate intoxicated cousin getting encircled and taken out of the party to sober up in a different room. Although I'm not particularly fond of group mentalities, they ultimately saved my life since my parents were humiliated beyond recognition for what they had done. They were unable to justify their actions toward me without coming across as even more heinous individuals. They essentially gave up, claiming they had no defense and that they were sincerely attempting to win my favor. Even though many of you are thanking my family for their assistance, I'm fairly certain that they did so primarily out of embarrassment. With the exception of 2 years due to COVID, they were present for the most of those 8 birthdays. During the remaining 6, they took no action. When my sister blew out my candles, they looked at me with disapproval. However, they remained silent. Why? My father, after all, is the chief of the household son. My granddad, who is a really formidable individual. The sincere, positive aspect. And he will stop at nothing to make you his enemy, and you are hated by the whole family. My grandfather effectively told them that they were all to blame for not helping me for years, which is one of the main reasons I dislike group mentalities. As a result, they felt embarrassed and contributed to the cost of my automobile. They didn't need to give much each to fund it because they have so many relatives. When I registered the car in my name, I had the receipt. After paying $2,000 for it, they added more money for tires and other parts. My grandfather changed the fluids and gave it a tune-up himself. My grandma gave the interior a thorough cleaning. Even while I'm incredibly grateful to them all, I still want to put some distance between us. I need time to sort things out on my own, and I'm not going to see my folks until Christmas or Thanksgiving. My sister has also been likened by others to that character from South Park, Eric Cartman. And the similarities are striking. My sister's obesity is a result of my parents' heavy junk food consumption. She detests consuming any nutritious food. She once added gummy bears to mashed potatoes, as I witnessed. My stomach turns at the notion of ingesting the mixture. She also spent a lot of time in the restroom due to her bad diet. To address that, my parents had to purchase fiber snacks for her to eat. And I don't think they were inexpensive to obtain the ones that were genuinely tasty. In addition to being incredibly dictatorial, my sister also wants to feel in control. She gave me directions almost all the time, so I would often hide myself in my room to avoid her. Because she was so demanding and domineering, she lost a lot of friends, and my parents would often tell her that the other kids were just envious of how unique she was. My sister used to call herself a princess quite a bit, and her spectacular meltdowns when she didn't get her way are reminiscent to Eric Cartman's. I am aware that my sister is also not a moron. She received a C average in school and makes very little effort. She could easily have received all, as if she had put in more effort. Update. How long has it been now? A year? I assumed I was done with this place and didn't log in for a while, but one day I thought, what the heck? And I just peeked in again, only to see a ton of private messages requesting updates. I'll provide one then. The information I'm about to share with you is largely compiled from stories my parents and grandparents taught me, so please bear in mind that I'm merely recounting what I learned. Sure, I'm doing great, but my parents and younger sister aren't in the same situation. My sibling, after trying a few different methods to get out of boarding school, as I mentioned in my last post, she eventually tried to do nothing but lie and con, but it didn't work either. Next, she attempted a fast. She declared that unless our parents came and took her home, she would not eat anything. My father had to intervene and tell my mother that my sister's actions were their responsibility, even though she was on the verge of jumping in the car to go save her baby. Before her 2-day hunger strike ever had a chance to last, my sister was clamoring for food in the cafeteria. Since a pediatrician had informed my parents that my sister, Little Miss Sunshine, was at risk of developing diabetes in the future and possibly experiencing growth stunting if she didn't control her weight and eat foods that provided the right nutrients, she wasn't allowed to have sweets or snacks unless they were healthful. That is, no more mashed potatoes with gummy bears. Naturally, my sister attempted to intimidate the other boarding school girls, but they refused to put up with her. She got into a fight one day and was severely battered after being attacked by several other girls at once. The group kicked her until a teacher broke them up. My sister was scraped and bruised all over, but she didn't have any major injuries. Indeed, she placed the blame anywhere but on herself. And from what I've heard, she even said the other girls should follow her lead. They avoided her because they didn't. She reportedly threw quite the fit over it. It was mentally unthinkable for her to not get what she wanted because she had so consistently gotten her way with everyone. My sister was exposed to junk food that my mother had been sneaking to her while she was at boarding school. My mother didn't try to sneak her any more junk food when the jig was up, despite my parents' intense argument. My sister used to be addicted to junk food and still does. Yes, she hasn't really altered in the last 12 months. Do any of you find this surprising? I'm not. Her acceptance of others is the only thing that makes her marginally superior. The universe does not revolve around her. After just a few months, her plans to escape the boarding school only become more elaborate. She tried to get her way there by self-harming. In the cafeteria, she managed to get her hands on a knife and proceeded to stand on a table, threatening to cut herself unless they gave her candy and sent her home. Indeed, not only did she insist on being sent home, but she also requested candy. In my initial post, I did mention that I had witnessed her adding gummy bears to mashed potatoes. Since our parents could only persuade her to eat certain items, her favorite thing to do was to top them with gummy bears when she didn't like them. Can you picture salad topped with gummy bears? Whenever we ate, she would frequently bring a bag of gummy bears to the table, which kind of negates the purpose of salad. Even the sight of gummy bears triggers memories for me. My sister was trying to be talked down to while they brought her whatever sweets they could find, but eventually she slipped and slid off the table. She suffered a concussion to her forehead, shattered her left arm, and broke her collarbone in the next fall. Even the boarding school was sick of her by now and didn't want her back after leaving the hospital. Her attempt to end her life really put her in a children's mental health unit, which was a terrible place for her to be. She was diagnosed with severe narcissism and pushed into therapy. Her upbringing instilled possessiveness. Unless my parents take her out, she is not allowed to leave the ward. They have also made her adhere to a very rigorous, nutritious diet, and to finish her education from that point on, she might as well have called it her personal hell. My mother was upset with my father about her desire to take her beautiful baby to the hospital, and during their argument, she slapped him with the closest object she could find. A bottle that was sitting on the kitchen counter. The bottle shattered on his face, causing a cheekbone crack and severe cuts. He had to be transported to the hospital by police after they were summoned, and my mother had to be carried away in the back of a police vehicle. In the end, my mother underwent psychological evaluation and was committed for a few months, during which she had to face her own strong impulses to support my sister. It turns out that severe emotional traumas are the cause. From her own early years, my mother possessed. However, nobody else can or will provide me any further information. My parents have discussed getting a divorce in the future, but they haven't gone beyond talking about sleeping in different bedrooms just yet. My 19th birthday was not too long ago. As for me, at a restaurant they know I enjoy, my grandparents hosted a celebration for me. My sister went, as did my parents. When she was given a little period of time outside the ward, I could see the utter resentment in her eyes. She sat there exactly as she had been, her lips twisted, staring at me as if she intended to set me on fire. Since she hadn't been permitted junk food for so long, she had already lost a good amount of weight by then, and her diet plan would last for a while. She hadn't had junk food like that from my birthday party in a while, but she still couldn't handle not being the focus of attention. She didn't scream when I blew out my candles this time. Rather, she burst into ugly tears. Right now, I can tell you that this was just another one of her devious tactics. She was just sobbing and asking repeatedly, why? Though she's just 9. I recall that the previous year, at 8, she insisted on having a car of her own since I had been given one when I was 18. Her age limit to obtain a learner's permit is 15. My sister threw a fit when I turned 19 and said there was no pizza, no presents for her, no prizes, nothing. She then began to swear at our parents and attempted to hurriedly leave the restaurant. She was attempting to replicate my actions from the previous year. You can call me overly analytical in my perverted manner, but I know my sister, and she will act in a way that she believes will satisfy her desires. My grandfather went over to talk to them before my parents simply apologized to everyone and took my sister home early. My grandmother later provided me with some information. He warned them that if they don't stop for good, this will never end, and they should avoid taking my sister to parties elsewhere or giving in to her demands. After that, my sister understood her tantrums were ineffective and was hauled out kicking and screaming. The following morning, she was driven back to the ward, and that is currently where she is. I don't know how long she will stay here. Though she's still little, she's the most disobedient child I've ever met. She probably won't change until she hits her lowest point, and in the interim, she'll be stuck in a situation where her expectations aren't met. This past year, no one has tried to place any guilt on me, not even my parents, for what my sister did. They have to acknowledge that I was not at all at fault in this, that I reared my sister to be a narcissist, and that supporting a narcissist is likewise an addiction. Other than narcissism, my sister has not been diagnosed with any mental problems based on what I have seen and heard. She is actually smarter than I am. I understand that she scored about 110 on an IQ test. She simply doesn't enjoy working hard unless there is a benefit to her. She was brought up in this manner, therefore I predict it will take years for her to change. While I'm doing well for myself, I will admit that I had to learn how to manage my finances and take care of all of my personal needs. Even if becoming an adult is difficult, it is still far better than my life spent with my parents and sister. To begin with, let me say that I am a complete moron. Some of you questioned my assertion that my sister is smarter than I am, pointing out inconsistencies in my posts, and pointing out that, despite the fact that I struggled in math and received a D and C in school, it was brought to my attention that I had consistently reported my sister's age incorrectly. I'm to blame for that. Usually all I say to people is that she's 10 years younger than me, but the years just kind of blended together. I guess that this time I would perform the math accurately on paper. My sister was born in June, so technically I was 7, but she got to blow out my candles for the first time when she was 3. It doesn't help that I am so terrible at arithmetic. I attempted to maintain anonymity by leaving out or somewhat misrepresenting some details, but in hindsight, that doesn't really make it particularly anonymous because anyone in my family might read this and know it's me. My sister was the center of attention from the time she was born, and I truly messed up. This goes beyond petty jealousy between older brothers. My sister was recognized on my birthdays in front of everyone just as much as I was. even though she didn't get to blow out my candles until she was 3, and I became bitter beyond belief. Picture the birthday boy sitting there while his mother uses the occasion to show off her baby to everyone, giving her an excuse to flaunt it. Until it was time for cake, my folks essentially ignored me. It wasn't a negative recollection at the time because my grandparents made up the difference. They even said it made some sense because my mother was having such a difficult time with the pregnancy, and my sister had only been born a month earlier. However, nothing was said or done about it when it happened to me on my 9th birthday. Before anything truly happened for me on my 10th birthday, my parents essentially did the same thing and showed off all of my sister's newborn successes. Then there were some of my gifts, which were obviously toddler toys that my sister was the only one who used. They were referred to as supplementary gifts, and although my name was on them, I wasn't the intended recipient. Once more, nobody in the family voiced their opinion or took any action. Then, things really started to go awful about the time I was 11. My sister's name appeared on several gifts, and my parents insisted that Little Miss Sunshine be permitted to blow out my candles. They all observed, but none of them took action. After that, my sister was the focus of all birthday celebrations, and occasionally she was even permitted to assist me in opening my gifts. 2. It did not assist. All they wanted was for me to appease her. Add all of that up to my 18th birthday, and you'll see why I eventually lost it on everyone at that age. For this reason, even though I claimed that my birthday was taken over for 8 years, it was actually more like 10. Even my parents' admission of guilt was no longer enough for me. I try to pretend like I can forgive them after that, but I'm not sure I will ever be able to. I was also informed by someone else that a person cannot be diagnosed as a narcissist until they are 18. I accepted my father's word for it because I'm not very knowledgeable about this kind of thing. I discussed it with my father over the phone this morning. When he originally asked me how I knew, I simply Googled the answer. He sighed and acknowledged that although my sister was exhibiting symptoms, an official diagnosis cannot yet be established. She may be exhibiting future NPD and other issues. However, there's also a good chance that you have a mental illness. It appears that my mother has had it as well, but they won't tell me what it is. My mother was diagnosed with said condition and PTSD months ago, which my parents have finally acknowledged. Certain childhood traumas led to the onset of PTSD. Whatever it is, my mother won't talk about it, and I won't beg her to either because it sounds awful. I questioned my father about why I was given such skewed information and white lies. He became irate and told me it's their problem, not mine, because of my sister. He simply assumed that if he told me that, I would accept it. He said, they should be the ones concerned about my sister. All I have to do is set my sights on the future and forget about dealing with Little Miss Sunshine for good. Regretfully, it's among the most sensible things he's ever said to me. Regarding Little Miss Sunshine, it's unclear how long she will stay in that ward. But someone else pointed me in the direction of this, and I had another question for my father. If my sister has ever mentioned wanting to harm me while there, that is. The response was very equivocal. Yes, I was the one my sister blamed. She places more blame on our parents, though. Her fundamental grievance with me sprang from her conviction that what was rightfully hers was mine, and vice versa. She even harbors jealousy. I currently live in my own apartment. This sparked further fury, outbursts, and demands. Having the same desires as mine, the therapeutic alliance has cooled. She became increasingly enraged over time, which is why I let her attend my 19th birthday. But she acted out even more aggressively that day. Have you ever witnessed a kid yelling mine at anything they see, while my sister is obsessed with my birthday? And all of that is my parents' fault, since it has always been that way for as long as she can remember. My sister did and still feels that she is entitled to my birthday. She yelled last year for this reason. That's why in her mind she freaked out this year. She has always had my birthday. My sister's treatment will take a long time, and there's no assurance that she will ever fully recover, according to my parents, who have requested me to kindly leave the issue alone. My mother is currently receiving therapy, taking medication for her own problem, which frequently causes her to feel lethargic. When she was briefly placed in a ward after striking my father with a bottle, she managed to keep her work. Despite the lesser income and potential demotion, her boss is a very kind person and permitted my mother to work from home after she returned. I wanted to make clear one more thing that I didn't include in my previous post. This year, my birthday fell on a different day than my actual birthday. Rather, We commemorated the day of my belated birthday celebration from the previous year, which is okay with me because I will always be bitter about my birthday itself. In essence, I was born at the end of July. August was the month of the belated birthday, and that's the day I want to commemorate going forward. And lastly, I get asked all the time how I'm doing. I was doing all right, if not rather well. I'll admit that learning how to manage my finances and pay my expenses as an adult has been difficult, but I managed just fine. The thought of returning to Reddit to discuss this has strangely made me anxious. And I guess what's the term for mentally relapsing? I'm not sure if I felt I was all right, but I'm constantly pessimistic and on edge these days. I was even sent home early by my supervisor as a result of it. Even though they are fully aware of my past, I still feel awful. My heart was racing just from having coffee this morning. I'm going to have to look into getting free counseling or something from the local support groups. After all, I'm on a tight budget. But right now, all I'm doing is trying to unwind and forget about the outside world. If I come back here someday, I might experience stress like this all over again. Therefore, I might not.